Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Apprenticeship Inclusion Models for Youth and Adults with Disabilities National Webinar on Designing Inclusive Apprenticeships and Pre-Apprenticeships. We're glad you're here. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. First of all, the meeting has captioning provided below the slides, but if you prefer to personalize your captions, you may open the captioning webpage in a new browser. The link for that is posted in the chat. During the presentation, we encourage you to think of questions that you may want to ask of the presenters. You may type those questions at any time during the presentation into the Q&A panel, and we'll save time at the end for Q&A. If you are experiencing any technical issues, open the participants list and select the raise hand button next to your name, and someone from our team will work with you to resolve your technical issues. Today, we'll have some welcoming remarks from a few special guests. We will briefly describe the AIM project. Later on in today's presentation, we'll go over in more detail our recent series of publications, which these webinars are celebrating and featuring. We'll move into our discussion of quality pre-apprenticeship, inside tracks, and move into universal design for learning and how to design with UDL. We'll close with a question and answer period and an overview of these publications that our team has produced and how to reach them when they're available. I'd first like to make a warm welcome to Jennifer Sheehy, Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the U.S. Department of Labor. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think this will be a fascinating webinar, and I hope you get a lot out of it. I'm excited about this for several reasons. One, it's the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act year, signed in July of 1990. Seems like so long ago. It's also the 75th anniversary of the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We celebrate that in October. And I'm particularly excited about this webinar because previous to my job at the Department of Labor, I worked in the Department of Education. At that time, we were spending a lot of research and investment in universal design for learning in an education setting. And now we're excited to apply those evidence-based practices to work-based learning models. Today, you are going to hear how program designers, instructors, mentors can support students and apprentices and in pre-apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship programs with inclusive and accessible programs. So I am thrilled that we have partners with us in this project. You're going to hear about our accessibility in an apprenticeship inclusion model, and our partners are National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity, the Kentucky Office of Career and Technical Education, and CAST. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back to Melissa and listen intently myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate that welcome. Before I move any further, I would like to welcome another of our special guests, Dr. Ben Williams, the CEO of the National Alliance for Partnerships and Equity. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this really important discussion today and to be able to introduce this work that is such a critical part of what we're doing in career technical education, work-based learning, pre-apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships, registered apprenticeships, and really focusing on helping individuals to have access to and success in the full spectrum of educational and career options. And so I'm here representing the National Alliance for Partnerships in Equity, which is a national alliance of states that is a consortium of states, individual institutions, and individuals who are focused on building capacity to implement effective solutions for increasing access, equity, and workforce diversity in that full spectrum of career opportunities that we're talking about. Go to the next slide, please. So I've said a couple times already, the full spectrum of career opportunities that are available. And I say that because there's key legislation, including ADA, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary, as we were just reminded, that ensures that youth and adults with disabilities have access to supports in being able to engage in different educational programs and opportunities, and then the supports and opportunities to be able to have work-based learning experiences that are meaningful and prepare them for that full spectrum of career choices. So we have ADA, which is prohibiting discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs and schools. We have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which focuses on free, appropriate public education that ensures special education-related services to students with disabilities. We have Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, which protects qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability and ensures an equal opportunity to receive program benefits and services, defining the rights of individuals with disabilities to participate in and have access to those benefits and services. And then WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, really increasing access to and opportunities for employment, education, training, and support services needed to succeed in the labor market. And so with WIOA, focusing on vocational rehabilitation outcomes, competitive integrated employment, and promotes greater emphasis on transition services for youth with disabilities. And then Perkins 5, the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, really focuses us on high quality career technical education leading to college/post-secondary education and careers. And what's exciting about Perkins 5 is the equity provisions that exist within this legislation that really help states and local education agencies to look deeply at data, to be able to examine where there may be barriers to access and opportunities for those who are still very much underrepresented in many of the high skill, high wage, in demand careers that are an emphasis within Perkins 5, and then to be able to direct resources to close those equity gaps, to really make available to students and individuals the full spectrum of opportunities that are out there, and especially to help people to access high skill, high wage, in demand programs of study and careers. And so I want to highlight a couple of the key pieces of that within Perkins 5, if we could advance to the next slide. So first, in Perkins 5, the definition of special populations has been expanded to now 9 categories, which continues to include individuals with disabilities, and continues to also include individuals preparing for non-traditional fields by gender, as well as individuals from economically disadvantaged families, including low-income youth and adults, single parents, including single pregnant women, out-of-work individuals, English learners, homeless individuals, and youth who are in or have aged out of foster care, and individuals with active military parents. And so what you'll see is actually between Perkins 4 and Perkins 5, there's been some redefinitions of special populations, and there are actually some new categories as well. And so next slide, please. So this is again emphasizing the importance of focusing in on high skill, high wage, in demand program study and careers, and ensuring equitable access and opportunity in those pathways. And so the way we do that is reiterating what I just shared at the very beginning, and that is, if you go to the next slide, please, that equity gap analysis at the state and local level with the comprehensive local needs assessment, which is a very powerful process that brings together stakeholders from throughout a region or a community to really look at where there are equity gaps in participation, retention, completion, continuation of individuals in these specific areas of focus, and be able to address those by driving resources towards closing those equity gaps, and not just look at things in silos, but really look at where there can be collaboration across agencies, across educational programs to ensure that there is that access and opportunity. And that has been exacerbated in the context of COVID-19, the total interruption to education, moving online, where there are still many individuals who are not able to access the full spectrum of opportunity. And so ensuring that individuals are able to get the high quality education and training that they need. There's also an emphasis on career guidance and academic counseling, which is a critical piece of the puzzle, especially down to the middle grades, down to 5th grade, to ensure that students are aware of the types of programs and opportunities that are available to them, with set-aside resources focused on recruitment of special populations, including individuals with disabilities, into those high-skill, high-wage, in-demand pathways. Next slide, please. So one of the pieces that is critical for the success of this work is resources that can be used for professional development for CTE instructors, for academic counselors, for academic advisors, for administrators, for paraprofessionals, instructional staff, to equip them with the tools to appropriately support students in learning. And one of the exciting things in Perkins 5 is the emphasis on the value of universal design for learning as an evidence and research-based approach that can be used to really ensure equitable access and inclusive learning for individuals. And I don't want to steal Dr. Sam Johnson's information that she's going to be sharing with us today about the great work that Cass been doing with UDL, but I do want to really call out the value that universal design for learning brings in providing that inclusive educational environment for students in CTE. And that's really emphasized throughout the legislation. And so the goal of all of this work, if we could go to the next slide, is to bring us to a place where we shift our thinking from one of looking at equality as everybody getting the same thing, to equity, where we're ensuring that everyone gets what they need to be successful, so that we're looking at the individual assets that students bring into the classroom, as well as the specific needs that they might have, and how to ensure that there is that true access and opportunity in the full spectrum of those career choices and educational program options to every one of our students, and especially to youth and adults with disabilities. And so before I pass the baton, I want to share with you all some additional resources that can help in the work that you're doing that are available through the NAEP website. If we could go to the final slide of this section, where if you go to www.napequity.org and just look at the special programs link on the top, and you'll find materials, including what's called the Pipeline to Career Success for Students with Disabilities, that has a comprehensive root causes and strategies document that is based on the research in looking at ways that state agencies and individual institutions can provide programs and services, approaches, activities that will help to support students with disabilities in CTE for them to be successful in those programs and pathways. Make the Future is a whole website that is focused around connecting women and girls to manufacturing pathways with a particular focus on women and girls of color, because women in general and women of color in particular are still grossly underrepresented in manufacturing pathways, although there are incredible opportunities available. And there's all sorts of great resources that are being made possible through Toyota Foundation and our partnership with them. All those resources are free and able to be accessed. And finally, the new Equity and Youth Apprenticeship Programs Toolkit, which was made possible through our partnership with Partnership to Advance Youth Apprenticeship, which is a national initiative focused on youth apprenticeship, and equity is a key principle of design and implementation of youth apprenticeships. And the work of this toolkit helps us to focus on ways that we can ensure access, inclusion, and continuous improvement so that equity becomes a key criterion of design and implementation of youth apprenticeships, and as well as its applicability to pre-apprenticeships and to registered apprenticeships as well. So I encourage you to take a look at these resources, to utilize them in your work, and to let us know how else we can assist in the critical work ahead of ensuring that equitable access and opportunities for individuals into the full spectrum of educational and career choices. So thank you. And with that, I will pass the baton back.
Thank you, Ben. We appreciate those thoughts and resources and all the great work that NAEP does. I'd like to give you all a brief overview of our project. The Apprenticeship Inclusion Models, or AIM as we like to call it, is funded by the USDOL Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP. ODEP is the only non-regulatory federal agency that promotes policies and coordinates with employers and all levels of government to increase workplace success for people with disabilities. The focus of the Apprenticeship Inclusion Models project is to expand access to occupational skills training, credential attainment, and job placement and retention through apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship models. Our goal with this project is to learn as much as possible about how the apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship model is serving and can be adapted to serve people with disabilities. Our approach is to support, conduct research, and to evaluate innovative apprenticeship pilot models in high growth, in-demand industries and sectors, including IT, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing. The objective of the project is to build apprenticeship pathways that target youth and adults with disabilities into high-demand, well-paying careers, to gain insights on how to scale up inclusive apprenticeship, and to contribute ideas and actionable practices to the national conversation on apprenticeship. ODEP is supported in this project by our broad team that you see here, representatives from Social Policy Research Associates, Jobs for the Future, and Wheelhouse Consulting. Today, our presenters from SPR will be Leela Habar and Caleb Van Docto, Mary Taylor from Kentucky Department of Education, and Dr. Sam Johnson from CAST. And I'd like to welcome first Dr. Leela Habar.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about pre-apprenticeship and designing inclusive pre-apprenticeship. So as part of the AIM initiative, we put together 5 research briefs, and one of them is on inclusive pre-apprenticeship. And so I'm going to briefly talk about findings from that. So why pre-apprenticeship? It prepares individuals for entry into registered apprenticeships, and it's also practice a way to conduct targeted outreach to specific groups, for example, individuals with disabilities. And so here on this slide are the 5 components of a quality pre-apprenticeship. And these are 5 components outlined in USDOL's definition of a quality pre-apprenticeship. So the first 2, classroom training curriculum and hands-on skill development. And hands-on skill development could be work-based learning or project-based learning with employer involvement. And these first 2 components are very similar to CTE, Career and Technical Education. In Perkins 5, it's defined as having rigorous academic content and work-based or applied learning. So pre-apprenticeship is really a CTE model. The third component of a quality pre-apprenticeship is support services. And so these are additional services that allow the program to customize supports for pre-apprentices so that they can stay and complete the program. So for example, extra tutoring might be needed. The fourth component is aligning the pre-apprenticeship program with the registered apprenticeship program. So for example, mapping the pre-apprenticeship curriculum to the entry requirements of the registered apprenticeships. And then the final component here is facilitated entry. So having mechanisms that facilitate the transition of pre-apprentices into registered apprenticeship programs. So one common mechanism is having guaranteed interviews with a registered apprenticeship program for pre-apprentices who successfully complete the pre-apprenticeship program. And so we wanted to learn about strategies that make these components more accessible for individuals with disabilities. So we conducted a literature review and interviews with program staff at pre-apprenticeship programs. And so we identified several strategies, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And many of the legislation pieces that Ben mentioned have provisions in them that support the strategies. So next slide, please. So many pre-apprenticeship programs are part of school CTE departments. And since schools generally provide supports for individuals with disabilities through IEPs, which are individualized education programs, schools have built into them support for these students, and those supports follow them through their pre-apprenticeship coursework. And IDEA, as Ben highlighted, includes specifications for the IEPs. Pre-apprentices can also request accommodations from their employer, since ADA requires employers to provide reasonable accommodation. So one of the important strategies that we learned about was coaching pre-apprentices on having that conversation with employers and being able to ask for that, because often in a school setting, that IEP was set up by their guardian or their parent. So they didn't have to be the ones asking for it. So one of the important things is helping coach the youth on asking for that and knowing their rights under ADA in asking for supports in an employer setting. WIOA, also mentioned by Ben, has many aspects of it that support individuals with disabilities. The one that I want to highlight is the pre-employment transition services. So these are a set of services to help youth with disabilities transition to work or higher education. And it includes many services. One of them is self-advocacy. So this is a way that tracks back to the point about making preparing pre-apprentices to have that conversation with employers about requesting for accommodation should they want that. Universal design for learning. So this is another component that helps make pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs more accessible for diverse learners, including students with disabilities. And as Ben mentioned, it includes professional development support for supporting professional development in UDL approaches. Next slide, please. So strategies for making these different components inclusive of individuals with disabilities. So incorporating these UDL practices is an important one. In one of our interviews, we had a good example of successes with UDL. We interviewed an instructor with Youth Build who had gone through a UDL training, and after going through that training, decided to change the way he taught to incorporate UDL principles. And after doing that, he observed a change in test scores. So prior to incorporating UDL principles, he saw that about 25% of his students had demonstrated literacy and numeracy gains. And after, in later cohorts, after he had infused UDL practices into his teaching methods, he saw 46% of his students had demonstrated literacy and numeracy gains. So just briefly, how did he change his teaching style? So he used multiple approaches. So when he had challenging topics, he would touch on them in multiple ways. So through traditional learning, and then he would reteach them using physical models and hands-on activities. Another important strategy is when there's educational content that's on the web, is making sure that that content is accessible, following the World Wide Web accessibility guidelines. And this also would apply for pre-apprenticeship applications and apprenticeship applications. Next slide, please. Support services. So this was consistently identified by all of our interview respondents as a really important aspect of pre-apprenticeship programs, because it allows you to customize the services so that all pre-apprentices are set up for success, including individuals with disabilities. So some of these strategies are IEPs, also establishing partnerships with other organizations for co-enrollment. So one of the programs that we talked to had established partnerships with the local WIOA Title I and Adult Youth programs, and also the state VR program. And so as part of the onboarding process, all pre-apprentices were assessed for eligibility in these programs. And if they were eligible, they had the opportunity to co-enroll, so they'd be in the pre-apprenticeship program and also get services from these programs. One of the other things we learned about in terms of support services is sometimes embedded in these pre-apprenticeship programs are industry certification tests. And so for people with learning disabilities or for other reasons who may need a longer time to complete the test, to request those from those third-party vendors to request additional time. And so starting that process early was identified as an important strategy, because sometimes that can take a while. And also coaching the pre-apprentice, because sometimes that request has to come directly from them. Next slide, please. And so supporting that transition from pre-apprenticeships to registered apprenticeships occurs at multiple levels. And so there's multiple strategies for helping individuals with disabilities with that transition. So at the individual level, there's the self-advocacy that I spoke about earlier. And so providing that training for the pre-apprentices themselves, but also for staff and for parents. And also generally having training for program staff in supporting individuals with disability. At the program level, aligning the curriculum with apprenticeship and making that curriculum accessible. And then having mechanisms of facilitated entry, whether it be the guaranteed interview or having credit for prior learning. Credit for prior learning, what is that? That is, you can earn credits in your pre-apprenticeship program, which could then be applied to some of the requirements of the apprenticeship program. And finally, at the system level. So states can create incentive and supports for creating pre-apprenticeships that are pipelines to registered apprenticeship programs. So for example, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Sue, and she's going to talk about the TRACK program. And that's a program that establishes a support infrastructure for school districts to create pre-apprenticeships or youth apprenticeship programs that connect to registered apprenticeship programs. And just before I turn it over to Mary, I just want to briefly just recap the strategies that I mentioned. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah. So incorporating UDL and making sure web accessibility for the curriculum is established. Customized support services to facilitate participant retention and completion. And finally, supporting the transition to those registered apprenticeship programs at the individual level, the program level and the system level. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary now to talk about the track program.
Hello, everyone, and greetings from Kentucky. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. TRACK, as you can see, that is our acronym, because in state government and education, we have to have that acronym to be official. So this is our brand of youth apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So the TRACK origins came about truly from my time as a career advisor at a technical center. And I saw firsthand how education was failing students by not connecting better with post-secondary opportunities. So when I got the position with the Department of Education, I had a meeting with the supervisor of apprenticeship for Kentucky at the time. And we both recognized a need to strengthen this pipeline and for adding these pathways into these careers. Next slide, please. So first of all, the track model is only for registered apprenticeship, and that is because we have to look at things what is the lens through the lens of what is best for students. And so this is a valid career pathway that provides regulation and oversight and leads to a nationally recognized portable credential. Next slide, please. And so in this, career and technical education is the key, and it's the crucial component for all students to develop employability skills and find these career opportunities. And then in pairing it with the registered apprenticeship program benefits students and employers. Next slide, please. So it's easy to see about what the win is for the student and what the win is for the employer, but there's also a win for district here, so that it was designed as a win-win-win for all involved. So, districts are meeting the needs of their regional employers. The industry certification that's awarded to the student will count as a successful completion of an apprenticeship pathway, and that makes the student career ready under transition readiness in our ESSA plan. And then the industry certification awarded to the student does count as a post-secondary credential in the state Perkins 5 plan for accountability. Next slide, please. So Kentucky is participating in both youth apprenticeship and youth pre-apprenticeship. I am aware of students with IEPs that are participating in both models. So we'll talk first about our pre-apprenticeship model. It is a streamlined approach in collaboration with industry partners. These are designated partners that have registered apprenticeship programs to prepare them to apply to their training program after graduation. Next slide, please. So we have this established in the areas that you can see, carpentry, electrical, masonry, and welding, but we designed that model to scale it into other occupations. So a lot of times employers will use these, this is on a broad level, that they will use this statewide to recruit. And so what we could also use it as a regional level, and really the employers are the ones driving this. So we do have it where we can scale this in other occupations. Next slide, please. So the pre-apprenticeship model, no matter how we scale this, will be 4 courses in a pathway that are selected by the partners that relate to the apprenticeship. So for instance, if it's an electrical apprenticeship, that student has to be in electrical pathway courses. And then there's an end of program assessment that goes along with the pathway. Next slide, please. And I do want to add with that assessment, accommodations can be made for students with IEPs and 504, such as extended time scribes and readers. So the partner commitment to participate in our pre-apprenticeship models, they must have a registered apprenticeship in good standing. They identify the targeted schools that they want to work with, that they have a visible presence in schools at least once annually, but a lot of times they're in there several times a year. This was pre-COVID. They're in the school several times a year. They're probably going to have to be doing that virtually this year. They guarantee an interview to graduates that have that track certificate, and award is credited at that discretion, so that the credit for prior learning is at the employer's discretion about what they would like to give that student for attaining that track certificate. Next slide, please. The certificate is very valuable. It does not expire. So, we could have students that would earn them, senior year, their graduation was senior year, and they may not elect to go apply to these programs until 2 or 3, 4 years after graduation, which is great. The employers will always recognize those. The certificate is issued by the Kentucky Office of Apprenticeship. So the students can either bypass the entrance exam, they can earn up to 1 year of apprenticeship credit, they can attain higher entry wages. That is, again, up to the employer. But what's been interesting to watch with this model is that the employers then use those credits to recruit students. So that's how they're recruiting against each other if they are in the same program areas. Next slide, please. The youth apprenticeship, that is actually where that student is working. They actually have a co-op, which is a paid work-based learning experience that is related to the program and the apprenticeship, their pathway in the apprenticeship. So again, if a student is going to be in a health science apprenticeship, they have to be taking health science courses, and then they will have that co-op. Next slide, please. So no matter how we scale this, the model requires a minimum of 3 CTE courses related to the apprenticeship and the co-op. The student will receive, the pool of students come from students that have their CTE concentrator status. So they have 2 courses in that pathway that relate to the apprenticeship to make them eligible to apply. Then the employer works with the schools to identify the students and the selection process. The employer determines if a student successfully completes and transitions as a full-time apprentice. So what this looks like is, they're working senior year, sometimes a junior, that's best practice. And then they will graduate on Friday, and on Monday, they just continue in seamlessly to continue that apprenticeship. Next slide, please. So if you look on the left-hand side, we started the low-hanging fruit with this where employers are already had apprenticeship programs. So that's, your skilled trades and your manufacturing, because there's 2 sale jobs with this program. You have to ask them if they will work with this age group and if they will register an apprenticeship program. So initially, those employers a lot of times already had an apprenticeship program. Since that started back in 2013, but you can see we've expanded into some non-traditional areas in the centers. These have been really interesting to watch. And again, they've all been employer driven. Employers have contacted me and they've said, we would really like to explore this. And so you can see, we kind of, I really didn't even see it going into an insurance associate, but we just had a student that graduated from high school and is now a licensed property and casualty insurance agent. And then if you look on the right-hand side, again, this was all pre-COVID. I don't know what's going to happen with the Retail Federation. That was one where they actually got an apprenticeship approved through the USDOL. We are going to go into the banking industry. I hope that we get into the equine industry so track can get on the track. The Kentucky Rural Water Association, that's a water treatment specialist that we're working on. Everybody needs clean water in their communities. So we're really excited about where we are going with this program in the future. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to end with we have a longitudinal database here in our state that is tracking, pun intended, these students after graduation. So the first year, if you can see that 86 were employed and what their wage was. But I think the most impressive numbers are 3 years after graduation. These students are 100% employed and they're making over $41,000. So we're looking at, 21-year-olds that have no college debt and are making over $41,000, tax-paying members of their community. So I really appreciate the time to be with you today. And I think I turn it back over to Caleb.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. And yeah, I love your acronym. I feel like that could go so many places. Like that last slide was track stats. Like, anyway, that's good. So I'm gonna help us kind of shift gears or kind of evolve our thinking and point ourselves into universal design for learning. Before I do, I just wanted to let folks know, thank you for dropping questions into the Q&A and into the chat. We are seeing them and collecting them, and we will make sure to address each of them at the end of the presentation. We have space for Q&A, so keep on doing it. We've also kept Ben Williams from NAEP on with us as well, so we'll all be able to respond to any of the questions that you have as we go along. So we got to hear a little bit from Dr. Habar as well as from Mary Taylor about how pre-apprenticeship is serving a wide and diverse student body and helping folks, helping youth transition into workplaces and careers with livable wages. And I wanted to get a little bit into how this happens kind of at a little more of a nitty-gritty level. So I want to give a quick overview of one bit of one design, one approach to training and learning for both programs as well as in the classroom itself, called Universal Design for Learning, that could be useful for programs that are looking to design either new or evolve their existing programs. And I'm actually going to start this with a quick overview of Universal Design for Learning, the background. So UDL is how we abbreviate it. UDL, it evolved out of the disability rights movements of the 1970s. So in the 1970s, kind of piggybacking on a lot of the civil rights work that happened in the 1960s. In the 1970s, there was also a disability movement, as many in the audience may know about. And there was a push to promote and secure inclusivity for people with disabilities in the work, in home, and social settings. And the movement really kind of called for an extension of the anti-discrimination and the social inclusion practices that came with the Civil Rights Act and were directed at that time, especially in consideration of women and minorities, racial minorities, and whatnot. But this work was really directed towards people with disabilities. So it was bringing that full inclusion of the community with them. And with the signing of the Rehabilitation Act in 1973, a lot of designers and architects in the field began to consider how spaces, like indoor spaces or outdoor physical environments, as well as the tools and products that we use day to day, should be redeveloped so that everybody can access them. And kind of the quintessential example of this is curb cuts, which folks are probably familiar with on street corners. But 50 years ago or so, it was rather rare to actually see a sidewalk that had a blending into the street where one would cross at an intersection. The first curb cut was actually put in place in Berkeley, California, I believe, in the 1960s. And this sort of idea of redesigning our environment and the tools that we use and the spaces that we use so that everybody could access them and interact with them, and people didn't have to make special adaptations just to interact with day-to-day tasks or abilities, was termed universal design. And so that term, it came to represent designing products, designing environments everybody can use, regardless of their age or their ability or any other potential limiting factors that might exist. So for students and educate in the educational setting, physical access was a critical first step to include learning experiences for them. But just a student's presence alone in the classroom does not equal access for everybody. There's curriculum changes. There's all sorts of other factors that go into ensuring people can benefit from the learning experiences. And so drawing on the inspiration from physical and architectural concepts of the universal design, CAST, who we're going to hear from directly after, from my colleague Dr. Johnson on the line, began applying universal design concepts to aspects in learning environments and educational settings beginning in the 1980s. And they went on to brand and define these and articulate these principles. So for educators and curriculum developers, researchers, parents, UDL is a framework for transmitting information and delivering instruction and assessments in a way that's more resonant for all learners. It's one that proactively accommodates different styles of learning. And so, great, thank you for the next slide. And I want to kind of define that. I define that here on this slide. And this is some language that's actually borrowed from Perkins 5. A lot of the work that NAEP has done has been to get some of the language of universal design into legislation now. So as we heard briefly from NAEP, they've been able to include that. But specifically, universal design, the language that's in the law is universal design is a scientifically valid framework for guiding education practices. And it's practices that, A, provide flexibility in ways information is presented, or in the ways students respond and demonstrate knowledge and skills, and in the ways students are engaged. And it's also a way, next slide, please. It's also a way to reduce barriers in instruction and provide appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. And one thing I want to call out about this is Universal Design for Learning, while the spirit of it came from the notion of, and all the work that was laid down with the disability rights movement, it's not specifically geared for people with disabilities. It's designed for everyone. It's designed for all. So the concept behind it and the work that's gone into it is really thinking about how do we build our world and make our educational systems something that everybody can access regardless of who they are, where they're coming from, how they interpret information, what their learning style is, what they're going home to, and what they're coming with when they step into the classroom or whatever learning environment they're coming to. Next slide, please. So broken down, there is a much more comprehensive overview of what Universal Design for Learning is, the guidelines that CAS has developed on CAS website. But I wanted to break down in simple terms, some simpler terms anyway, what Universal Design for Learning is. And so it's this framework, it's based on research in the learning sciences, which includes cognitive neuroscience. So it's not only education research, but it's also research in how we humans think and interpret information and learn things. And the work that's been put into UDL guides the development of flexible learning environments and learning spaces that can accommodate individuals with learning differences. The central theme is accommodation of varying learning styles by providing multiple options for representing information. This is actually the middle table or chart or icon that I have here on the slide, but it's providing multiple options for representation, and that involves providing learners with multiple means of representing concepts or ideas or information or other content through the learning process. It's also providing multiple options for action and expression, or providing learners with multiple means of communicating what they know, often through varying modalities. In other words, varying ways that they might communicate that they know something and can do something. And then it's also providing multiple options for engagement, for providing learners with multiple means of engaging with teaching content and providing opportunities to apply learned concepts to their own lived experiences. And UDL relies on activating different areas of the brain through these multiple means of representation and action and engagement. So learners can access the material, they can build upon it, and they can internalize the content. And so that's a very kind of quick overview of what UDL is. And what I want to do is pass it over to my friend and colleague, Sam Johnston, who can give us kind of a down-to-earth look at how UDL is being applied currently in pre-apprenticeship programs in the country. So Dr. Johnson, please.
Great, thank you so much, Caleb. So we've been working with STRA and Jobs for the Future and the Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership as part of the AIM initiatives in one of the pilots. And what we've been really doing is trying to apply Universal Design for Learning to the pre-apprenticeship level within a registered apprenticeship. And what we're really doing when we apply UDL is a process that starts with really thinking about clear, rigorous, relevant goals. One of the beautiful things about apprenticeships is they're very defined. They have clear, rigorous, relevant goals. But what we want to make sure is those are always well-defined. And then when we bring UDL in, we really think about multiple paths and options for achieving those goals. So high standards are always there. We need apprentices that meet those high standards, but we need to make sure that where we can provide choice and options for meeting those high standards, we allow for that. And that everybody understands what the goals are. Trainers, teachers, apprenticeships, and employers all understand the goals and the ways in which apprentices and pre-apprentices can get there. And then what we need to do is we need to anticipate that there'll be barriers, especially if we design, with a one-size-fits-all. So UDL really looks at what are the goals, what are we trying to achieve, and what are the barriers that might exists for certain learners as they try to achieve those goals? And how do we think about understanding those barriers and addressing them? So we very often talk with numerous stakeholders about what the barriers are. We understand the various types of pre-apprenticeships. What are they trying to achieve? Where are the pain points? And in this work, really ensuring and looking at pre-apprenticeship assessments and looking to make sure that they're inclusive and that all participants understand the assessment process and can succeed at assessment so that they make it from the pre-apprenticeship onto the next level and through registered apprenticeships. And assessments in particular are a focus of this work because assessments very often are designed, especially high stakes assessments, are designed really with one size fits all. And so innovating around assessment really allows us to look at especially the principle around multiple means of action and expression. We give people choice and options in how to express their understanding, how to build and demonstrate skills so that they really can really fully demonstrate what they know, so that we're actually accurately capturing what people understand and can do. And that's so important for the hands-on context of apprenticeship, that we don't create an assessment that's got a lot of barriers that doesn't actually really allow us to capture what someone knows. And so that's where we go in and we think about designing options to reduce the barriers for all learners, really providing solutions to all participants and designing with stakeholders to meet specific participant needs before, during, and as they arrive. Next slide, please. So if we think really of what we've done here, UDL does not require the use of education technology, but very often we build technology and we employ technology that has universal design for learning in it because it allows for more flexible learning environments. So our solution here within the AIM pilot did focus on the creation and adaptation of a technology product. So interestingly, in the career navigation cycle and product landscape, there's really 4 stages to career guidance or career exploration. So there's exposing people, what's out there, what careers are out there. There's discovering, how does what's out there align with what I like, what I'm good at, what I value, what's available in my community. And then there's documenting, what am I good at? How do I demonstrate the skills that I have that are aligned with various career pathways? And the final area is really achieve. How do I, go from this guidance to landing a job? Most products in career guidance and demonstration are focused on this last level because they're generally employer funded of really landing the job. But we need to do so much before that to make sure that we really support that full spectrum of career guidance that really everybody on this webinar has been talking about today. Next slide, please. So the original application for this software product that became part of the apprenticeship, the AIM initiative, was STEMfolio. And what it really is a personalized and portable e-portfolio that was developed by CAST with funding from the National Science Foundation in partnership with Youth Build USA, a national pre-apprenticeship program that serves out-of-school young people. And the goal was to help these young people understand, document, and demonstrate their skills and abilities in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, math, and also career skills. We built this personalized and portable e-portfolio with Youth Build through a co-design process and are now testing it in Youth Build sites across the country. So next slide. So co-design is really essential, and we met 24 times with young adults from 7 different Youth Build sites across the Northeast. We held 7 focus groups with Youth Build staff. We continue even in our phase now to continue to meet regularly with Youth Build young people and staff and thinking about, okay, what adaptations are needed for the current circumstances everybody's in with, programs closed and all the rest. And we are currently conducting an experimental study to see how STEMfolio works at sites across the country. And the goal is to really see, does allowing young people to document and demonstrate their understanding through this universally designed e-portfolio help young people really understand that they have STEM skills, document those skills, and be able to showcase those to relevant people, help them with the next step, whether it's employment or further education or moving on to a registered apprenticeship. Next slide. And in this, sorry, I just back a little bit just to show the co-design process. So we have a few images here that show different things we do during co-design. So we often take out paper prototypes of a technology early, and we allow people to sticky vote on features or functionality that they like, that they think is relevant for them. We often also do things, we did a lot of work that you'll see here around really ensuring that competencies, STEM competencies, were embedded in this personalized and portable e-portfolio. And so we had people sort of do a card sorting task where they sorted things into, you know, these are competencies I use in this setting, these are competencies I don't, you know, drawing on their experience, and especially in work-based learning at Youth Build. And then finally, in the third image, what you see is really taking out an early version of the developed software and continuing to iterate and refine that with user testing. Next slide. So IMT Folio is an adaptation of STEM Folio, the base product. And we basically, the underlying technology and software functions the exact same way, but we built this technology around the industrial manufacturing technician apprenticeship pathway as one of the pilots for the apprenticeship inclusion models. The Wisconsin Regional Training Partnership and Jobs for the Future were really our partners that have been working on this registered apprenticeship for a number of years, making it inclusive. Our goal was really to think about this problem of practice at the pre-apprenticeship level, that pre-apprentices with disabilities, as well as other pre-apprentices, were often excluded out of the next step, you know, moving on to full apprenticeship, when they were only given one way to document their understanding of what they were learning at the pre-apprenticeship level and demonstrate that. So if all there is sort of a high stakes written test, as our partner at WRTP likes to say, it really doesn't tell you anything about whether someone can drive a forklift. So we brought the IMT Folio in to provide a way to give choice and options for demonstrating understanding and skills. So now we'll look at just a few of the features of that if you go into the next slide. So IMT Folio really allows for documenting evidence of learning. The pre-apprenticeships can show what they know in different ways. It supports skill and knowledge development. Trainers can target what skills they want pre-apprentices working on, see their effort, and give feedback. So it's an environment where both trainers and pre-apprentices have the capacity to input into the system. And then the pre-apprentices can curate a subset of things that they put in their e-portfolio, what we call challenges, and they can share a subset of those out with people who don't have access to the system. So they could send a link of their best work around using CAD, or all their work and safety practices to a future employer, in order for them to be able to document and demonstrate the skills they have that are curated out of the larger e-portfolio. So next slide. So as I said, trainers author challenges. So unlike a traditional e-portfolio, this is one that has a trainer end. Trainers are basically able to go in and prompt an apprentice to demonstrate a specific skill or knowledge around a challenge category that matters within the context of industrial manufacturing technician. So there's 5 challenge categories: safety, quality practices and measurement, manufacturing processes and production, maintenance awareness, and essential industry skills. So a trainer could go in and say, I want to author a challenge around maintenance awareness. I'm going to create a challenge about turning a piece of machinery on and off safely. And I'm going to ask the pre-apprentice to show me over the next week that they've been able to do that. On to the next slide. So also in this system, what's beyond just the categories are competencies, and these competencies are pulled from the job book for IMT, from things that show up on the exam to get into the registered apprenticeship, and were co-designed along with WRTP and JFS. And the competencies are really within a specific category, specific skills that IMT pre-apprentices need to succeed on the job. And these competencies get tagged and attached to a specific challenge or specific demonstration of evidence that you have a skill to give a more refined idea of what skills someone is demonstrating with that particular documentation. The other thing that's interesting about the competencies is that there's a pop-up definition when you're adding them to your challenge. So the user is able to understand what a competency is at the time of use. So they're able to say, is this really what I demonstrated or with this piece of evidence or not? Oh, okay, this means that. Yes, that's right, I can go in. So really giving them the language to really be able to speak about their skills and think about how to, you know, how to really make sense of what they're learning and what they're doing in specific language that comes from industry, that is pulled from the job book, from the exam, the things they're supposed to know. Next slide. So trainers can really create challenges in two ways. They can go in when they go in and go in on their side of the e-portfolio. They can create a new challenge, or they can copy and adapt an existing challenge that someone else has created. So they can really do this by going in, and there's a fillable template to create a challenge that's really meant to be very simple. So they really just follow 3 steps. They pick a category. They might say safety or essential industry skills. They add a description in media, which is really, what do I want this person to demonstrate? And again, trainers have choice in what they demonstrate. And then they select up to 7 competencies that are targeted with that challenge, and then they post it. And once it's posted, the apprentice can take it. So if you go on to the next slide. Pre-apprentices then take a challenge, and the goal is really for them to document their job skills through their work at WRTP. So here's an example of a challenge that a pre-apprentice takes. Step 1, what's being asked of me? There's some written directions. Then there's a video of how to safely change a tire. And then there's just step 2 is, okay, now I can upload a video of me changing a tire, or I can write a testimonial, or I can upload a diagram of how to do it. So they have choice in how they demonstrate their understanding. And then they can select up to 3 competencies that are attached to that particular piece of evidence. So they could, you know, show how they safely changed a tire, and they could say, you know, safe practices, teamwork, maybe they did it with someone else, and then they post that and their challenge is done. So on to the next slide. So, you know, I think the other thing that's very important in here is that it's a fully accessible tool, like everything we create at CAS. There's choice in how to receive information through text-to-speech. There's choice in how to record your responses through speech-to-text. That's there for the trainer and for the pre-apprentice, knowing that trainers also need inclusive environments for their own instruction. Next slide. So these are just an example of the global accessibility tools. So there's a text help toolbar with built-in read aloud, translation, and dictionary functions. All throughout, people can highlight text and have it read to them. They can look up terms. There's also speech to text. Voice inputs and all text fields are available both on mobile and desktop. And there's closed captioning on all videos. All videos include subtitles in English and auto translation for additional languages. So those are some of the features. Next slide. So this is just an example of WRTP training with Western envelopes. This has been run a few times. So pre-apprenticeships completed challenges during their training on the various skill areas needed to qualify them for on-the-job training milestones. So this is an example of somebody under the quality practices and measurement showing that they can measure an envelope to 1/16 of an inch accurately. Very important practice for being able to manufacture envelopes and understand quality practices, pull out ones that are not up to spec. And I'll pass it back to Caleb. Oh, sorry, yeah, go back. Just there's other applications underway. We're bringing this into career and technical education in Massachusetts right now, and 3 schools. We're looking to bring it into corrections to support documentation of job skills, both when somebody is still in the correctional system and also when they re-enter the community, and looking at in-service professional development using this universally designed e-portfolio, and then also looking in voc rehab for supporting employment services for job seekers. Pass it back
Thanks,
to you, Caleb.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and that last slide is actually pretty key too. So I'm glad we went back to it, because it actually really nicely flows into one key thing I wanted to kind of bring back. So this last slide I have up here, I actually stole right out of Sam's presentation. She presented earlier on these three boxes, or these three columns, describing essentially how UDL, the impact that UDL has for programs. And I've been so appreciative of getting to see how CAST and WRTP through the AIM project is using IMT Folio to really design a program that all participants can engage in and interact with. But I wanted to also re-highlight this concept that UDL is not solely, it's not solely at the instructional level. UDL can actually be applied systemically, and it can be applied in the design of programs itself. And it's kind of a key point that I wanted to make, because oftentimes there are a lot of when we design programs or when we design educational systems, the designers have their own limitations and perspectives. Everybody does, actually, when they engage in all kinds of work. And so UDL becomes a useful tool that one can use, designers can use, at the forefront, at the design of the system. And this is, it's kind of echoed in something that Sam mentioned earlier on, which is, when they were designing the STEM folio and the IMT folio now, they're really doing a co-design process with the end users, with the apprentices or the pre-apprentices themselves. And that sort of approach of really kind of designing a system for the people that are going to be using the system and doing it in a collaborative way, and applying this kind of at the outset, actually will ultimately clear barriers or clear challenges that would come up otherwise after the fact. We have heard from instructors in classrooms across the country that they and have seen that they are adapting their training to their students. It happens often naturally, but they rarely have the language or the science behind what they're doing to really kind of put a name into that effort. But through our work in the brief that's going to be coming out on Universal Design for Learning through the AIM project in the coming months and out of ODEP, we saw not only like small scale in classroom changes that people are making, but also practices that can be useful more systemically as programs are designing and thinking about how they'll actually build programs from the ground up that are useful for everybody who might engage with them. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly mention a couple of things that we heard to give folks that are on the line now or are listening to the recording later how UDL might apply to your own programs. So, we certainly saw or heard people making small scale changes to programs. This could be circumstances like including visuals or modeling during their during training, to just having slides up and text. Matter of fact, this webinar itself could even be kind of considered thinking about that. We have the slides in written format. I'm also speaking and giving an audio format. We have captioning that's happening in the bottom. But there's even more that could be done in these sorts of formats in the way that information is conveyed to make it even more accessible for people. So there's small scale in classroom changes that people can make. One of the simplest ones that teachers typically do is, instead of handing a textbook or a piece of a homework assignment to folks. They'll actually walk through the process with the students themselves. They'll model it. They'll provide visuals for people who are trying to engage. Other concepts include things like providing mastery-oriented feedback. This is that using language that isn't just saying, oh, you're very smart, or you're, good job. It's more growth language. It's calling out specifically what people do right, so that they can repeat it, and catching if there are errors or mistakes made, and saying, identifying the effort that's going in, and then providing information that allows people to correct it effectively. UDL, the framework, terms that as mastery-oriented feedback. There's also been a lot of research that we highlight in the forthcoming brief, and that is also available on CAST's website, that speak to some of the research that's been done in college and university level classrooms. CAST comes out of the educational sphere, and so there has been preliminary research in the educational spaces, but the research is still very limited in terms of the workplace or in apprenticeship spaces, but there is a lot of crossover, because as we know, in apprenticeship there is a related instructional component that frequently happens in a classroom-like setting, and so there's a lot of parallels that people can draw and pull from that. And then lastly, one of the key mentions that I wanted to make is, for programs, when they're designing their programs from the outset, or when teachers are applying their UDL practices in the classroom, affording opportunities for students to have individual choice, to have autonomy in the work they're doing, has really shown to give a boost, a degree of self-confidence to students that what they're doing is effective. And we heard a little bit about that from our previous presenters, from the research that we've done, and what we've heard of people who are applying UDL practices currently in the field. So I wanted to highlight those key items. And with that, I will turn it back to Melissa, who I think will help us walk through some questions. I'm not sure all the questions that have come in, but Melissa?
Thank you, Caleb, and thank all of you for these informative and inspiring presentations. We do have a number of questions that have come in, and I'll start in the order of presenter. So Ben, there are a couple of questions for you. The first is, many campuses do not require professors and instructors to take ADA or UD training. Do you see accreditation such as SACS moving toward requiring this?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, I think professional development is a critical piece of the puzzle, and that professional development doesn't only focus on content, which is often the case. Often professional development is directed towards people learning content that is being taught in the classroom, rather than helping people to understand how they show up in the classroom, how they may interact with students, how they may interact with communities, and how unexamined biases may actually create barriers to access and opportunities for students in the classroom, whether they be students with disabilities or students who are often underrepresented in those classrooms or those programs and pathways. So I think professional development directed not only towards content, but towards that why. Why should we employ universal design for learning? I mean, UDL, the portfolio we learned about today, they're so exciting because what they're doing is there's an intentionality around ensuring that each student in the environment is able to access that learning in an accessible way. And as a result, everyone benefits. So, we're looking at ensuring equitable access and opportunity for youth and adults with disabilities. But individuals who have many different learning differences, many different ways that they may be accessing information differently, will benefit. So back to the initial question, I think tying that to accreditation or tying that to continuous improvement processes that build in that intentionality around professional development guiding the work of ensuring an equitable learning environment for every student is a critical piece of the puzzle. So I appreciate the question and hope that's a helpful way to think about it.
Thank you, Ben. That's very helpful. I'm going to jump to Mary. And Mary, you first of all got a shout out about the Kentucky's longitudinal data system Twitter feed, which is at KY Stats, and a question, and also a greetings from Versailles, Kentucky. Kentucky also has a state government apprenticeship program through Personnel. Has your program looked into expanding into state apprenticeships for students? Mary?
Hi, thank you for the question. And actually, I'm very, very proud to say that TRAC was the guiding force behind these state government apprenticeships. So the Department for Social Services initially started this with an admin support specialist apprenticeship, and they utilized our business students. They took 6 youth apprentices. That was a pilot. We have to tweak a few things on that, so we didn't do that again this year, but it's certainly able to actually scale across the state. And also the Commonwealth Office of Technology, which is that information technology guiding support for all state offices, not just in the state capital of Frankfurt, but across the entire state. They are on, I believe, their 12th youth apprentice for information technology. So they've taken our IT students through those, which is a brilliant idea because those kids, the skill set that they have already in IT is really just taking them to the next level. So yeah, really excited that actually, to my knowledge, only TRAC students have been accepted in those state government apprenticeships, and they can both be scaled statewide.
Great, thank you, Mary. And a follow-up, do you get any pushback from employers regarding students being under 18?
Oh, that's a great question, and one that I get quite often. And the short answer is yes. And so it's kind of been like peeling back the layer of an onion. At first, employers would say, we cannot work with this age group because of child labor laws. Well, luckily for me, the Kentucky Labor Cabinet would, we did a deep dive on child labor laws. And if it's for programs such as an actual apprentice or that are in vocational education programs, which what CTE would be, there are actually exemptions to child labor laws that will allow that student to do more on the job. So we kind of poked a hole in that. And then, so the next layer of that onion would be child labor, workers' comp. We won't have coverage for them under workers' comp. Well, we actually created a program called YES, and it stands for Youth Employment Solutions, because I literally got tired of hearing no. And so we love our acronyms again. And so the YES program is a partnership we have with the DECO staffing agency, where those students will be on their payroll and their workers' comp. It's one of those things, I don't care if they use it, but we just have to remove the barrier, in which it has done. And so we even have employers that elect to use this model because it doesn't affect their workers' comp rates. And so they say it's quick, easy, and effective. And so they will use it, but it also drives a conversation. So maybe, employers, that's just their standard answer. Oh, we can't because, of our workers' comp, but they've never even had that conversation with maybe, say, their HR manager. And so it really just drives that conversation. And once the employers find out, we just need to look at our policy. Maybe there's something that we can add to it, or maybe it does cover that and we just haven't updated it in a while. So it was just about removing a barrier. And then probably lastly, then we get, well, it's against our policy. And I'm like, well, this was against our policy as well, but policy is meant to be revised, reviewed, and rewritten. And so that's what we did. And so I just encourage employers to, look at their policy to see if it's an internal policy, something that they can change.
Great, thank you, Mary. Moving on to a question for Leela. It sounds like the programs you spoke with were really at the center of connecting training, support, funding, et cetera, to increase access to students with disabilities. What are the kinds of ahas they shared with you, steps they took that made a big difference?
That's a good question. So I reiterate, it was Staff training. So one of the things that came up was the importance of having staff who was familiar with self-disclosure and having those conversations. Another one that came up a lot was support services. So they want, actually all the programs I spoke to want all of their participants to succeed. So designing for success means structuring programs that have custom supports for whatever the pre-apprentices need to succeed in the program. And then partnerships, that was a big one because partnerships help with that support services point. They also help on the recruitment side. So if a program is targeting specific groups, having those partnerships with recruitment partners to make sure that you have a pipeline of people coming and applying to your program. And also partnerships at the program design phase. So organizations that are set up to support individuals with disabilities can consider actually establishing pre-apprenticeships with the services they already have in place and connect themselves to registered apprenticeship programs.
Great, thank you, Leela. For Sam, and actually, I have a question for Sam and or Caleb, several, so I'm going to pick and choose. I'd be interested in hearing how individuals persuade employers to apply UDL in their recruitment and onboarding, and how they weigh the perceived additional burdens and costs against the benefits.
Sam here. Caleb, I think you probably have the bigger context. I can take it quickly and pass it on to you from the, we get this question across a range of contexts. I think there's a number of things that contribute to persuading people. I think certainly there is work up front in terms of getting to know universal design for learning and making good choices about universally designed technologies, ensuring things are accessible, which is foundational to UDL. But I think there is also a case to be made for what employers get, right? If employers are clear about the skills that their apprentices are building and demonstrating, they're much more capable of bringing those apprentices in a way where they get it all the way to becoming journey workers or whatever sort of, advanced occupational tasks there are. So there's a case to be made for the product we're delivering to employers by making sure that all of our learners are essentially optimized to be as successful in the pre-apprenticeship and the youth apprenticeship and the apprenticeship as possible because they're able to have the things they need to learn. I think another point to be made is really just around the incredible lost talent that happens when we only design one way. And, if you think of we're 30 years after the ADA and the number of innovations and creativity and brain power that's come from our capacity to better include people with disabilities in the workforce, that's a tremendous amount of talent that has really advanced so many things that we do. So I think that's another case to be made. I think the third case to be made is really a legal one. Accessibility practices are the law. There are non-discrimination provisions around apprenticeships from recruitment all the way through to job placement. And I think apprenticeship programs are taking that, as they should, very seriously. So I'll pass it on to Caleb because he has probably the broader context for this.
Yeah, Sam, I think you really kind of hit a lot of the marks. I think I can just kind of supplement what you said, which is, when we were doing our with this, we also spoke with employer trainers and engagement specialists and such who were who worked on disability initiatives. There are a lot of employers, especially large employers, who already have training programs. When they hire people, they bring them on, they go through some sort of training program for anywhere from a week to several weeks long. And companies put a lot of money into these training programs. And actually what we heard is that a lot of these training programs, the curriculum that's been developed is exquisite. It's like very, very thought out. It really draws on a lot of UDL principles. But then when they actually conduct the training, the individuals doing the training do it one way and one way only. They have like a singular perspective, and it's it's really just at least in part because oftentimes the trainers don't know or have not had the connection to UDL like principles themselves to think about how they engage with folks who are trying to onboard into these positions. And we heard from employers that they've lost a lot of good people who they could be accessing just because it was determined that they didn't fit the culture, or they couldn't like learn the way that it was how the process had been done from the outset. An example might be, for instance, we heard about a large employer who actually had an inclusivity or diversity initiative, and were trying to bring in employees who were on the autism spectrum. And so in order to do so, they worked with an employer consultant who helped them bring in some social scripts. They basically they assigned the individual an iPad or a tablet, and in the tablet it included a scheduler so that it sent off an alarm when it was time to move from, say, like one workstation to a next, or when to go on break in the next. And it also included things like social scripts so that when individuals were, say, in the break room, like it actually prompted them to engage their coworkers to ask how they're doing, or what's going on, and building that relationship with fellow employees actually knits and creates. There's research already that exists behind this, but that actually knits and creates a stronger workforce and ultimately creates more resilient companies. The other idea that I also just kind of wanted to flag, especially in this age of COVID, is there is likely going to be a lot of what's termed opportunity youth, or disconnected youth, who are not connected to the workforce or connected to the education system as a result of jobs that are not there, or people that are needing to stay in the job longer, and so there's less space for youth who are coming out of high school or coming out of college and trying to get jobs. UDL is a way to not just bring in everybody, people with a disability, but it's a way to bring in everybody. It's a way to consider all the different perspectives, regardless of people's backgrounds. And so it's essentially a mechanism to build the diverse workforce that reflects the citizenry of the country and the community in which employees are working in.
Thank you, Caleb. Do we have time for one more question, Caleb, or do we need to move into wrap-up mode?
I mean, I think if there's one more, I like questions, but I'm going to leave it up to you. Your turn.
Okay. Well, we want to end on time, and we do have some final things to wrap up. So I think I will thank everyone for your generous presentations, the questions that came in. We really appreciate it. We briefly wanted to mention that there are 2 more webinars in this series coming up that feature findings and special guests from the series of research briefs that the AIM team has been producing, and of which today's webinar was a part. So on the 27th, that's at the next week, I believe, or yes, next week, understanding institutional funding sources as a part of apprenticeship system building, and then on September 16th, resilient apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship lessons from a pandemic. So that will be an exciting one. We spoke to so many folks about how they were handling the current COVID crisis, and look forward to sharing their wisdom with all of you. Finally, I wanted to let everyone know that following this webinar, you will receive a thank you email that includes directions on where to find this presentation, as well as a link to a short survey. We really appreciate responses to this survey, which is different from the brief survey that will open up for you after you close out of WebEx. We would actually, if you are planning to dedicate a little more time to this webinar afterwards, we would request that you would fill out the survey that comes in your email, provide us with valuable input and feedback about how we can make these webinars more useful to you. Unless there's anything else, I want to thank everyone so much, both presenters, facilitators, and attendees for coming. We really enjoyed it.